So, things are a little glum. I'm not on a script today. Surprising, perhaps, but yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit at the microphone. Some of this will get edited down inevitably, but I think I wanted to go ahead and talk about what is going on with the narrative side of things and talk about some bright spots and some not so bright spots. For context, yes, I have seen all of the different bits and pieces of other creators talking about what they think is and isn't working right now in Destiny 2, and you can assume I've seen them all and I agree with all of them. Datto, Llama, Fallout, whatever. Like, yeah, I've seen all their content with regards to what's going on. I have experienced the exact same things. I don't like the idea of jumping in and making a video like this purely on the basis that I don't want to contribute too much to what is already an overwhelming chorus of voices saying stuff that is vaguely similar. And I also know that there are some people who come to this channel because they want the story and they would love an escape from everything that is going on in the rest of the game, where things generally are not going so well between the bugs and the cheaters and everything else that's happening that generally is not making the game feel very fun. So, my promise to you is that this is not the only video that I have planned for the end of September. I have 2 more pieces of content coming up. One of them is on a Death Star. It's going to be pretty cool. The other one is a long-form video talking about Destiny Rising, which I've been working towards for several weeks now. I expect those at some point soon, but for today, I just wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit more about what's going on with the narrative and talk about what's happening with, well, Ashen Iron, Edge of Fate, leading up to Renegades, the general narrative health of the game. Something that can't be avoided is simply the fact that Edge of Fate's release, now that we are a few months out past it, whilst it may have been qualitatively really good, and I certainly stand by that, I will remind you all again that I'm talking about the narrative and the lore, not the damn campaign missions and Matterspark. Like, if you really need reminding of this, please just leave, click off the video. Clearly we don't care and don't talk about the same things. But yeah, that may have been received really well across the community, but I think it's important to understand that there's just a sizable portion of people that are checked out of the game at the moment, and that's partly through some fault of the rest of the game having persistent troubles over and over and over again, and that's also partly thanks to just the main story of the Light and Dark saga ending. No new revelations here. I think it was always going to be kind of an insurmountable thing to make the entirety of the game feel as though it was something that people wanted to come back for. Credit where it's due, Bungie has actually crafted a story hook that means that there is purpose in the universe again, which is something I identified as like one of the really big problems with Destiny's narrative at the time being. That being said, it's clear that the main hook of Light and Dark Saga's, you know, villain and prospect of facing down the darkness, that's been completed and people got their 10 years of story and now they're pretty content. Unfortunately, and I know this will ignite an entire debate in the comments section, I'm sure there will be people flinging insults left, right and center at me, Bungie, other people in the comments, whoever it may be, but I fear that the only real way to push the narrative forward in a manner that would bring players back now is to add a 3 to the end of the box. So, yeah, there's that. I don't think that's any new revelation. It certainly isn't something which is some wild idea. It certainly does not fix all the problems with Destiny at current, and it also means that there are going to be even more issues that arise from the state of it being a new game. But as far as a reset for the player base is concerned, I think that's where things are right now. And I don't want to say that as a means of taking away anything that has been done by the narrative team at current that has been absolutely fantastic, because I stand by what I said. Edge of Fate rocks. Like, it was a really good story. You had some really interesting and compelling characters, some of the best writing that's ever been done. The delivery that was done by all of the different cast members in Edge of Fate, across both audio recordings, by the way, the old one that was temporary and the new one which is now permanent, they were both really good. And then on top of that, you have some of the best cutscenes, playing with some really cool material. Most impressively of all, I think, is the fact that they built a really good story around some of the most nebulous and complex narrative material in the game, which was the Nine. I mean, If you'd asked me 5 years ago to describe the Nine, I would have been able to say something about dark matter. But the narrative team was able to actually craft a coherent story around all of this. However, it's clear that it's not been quite enough, and that's not from the perspective of sitting there and saying the story wasn't good, it's just from the perspective of players are not as involved with the story yet. Could that change? Maybe. I think that there is a world in which that's possible. And contemplate and just imagine this for a second with me, because Destiny's seasons, as much as they got a lot of flack, they brought players back whenever they were doing things. And I think that the kind of 2 expansions a year tempo that we have now isn't exactly seasons, but it can carry a similar sort of cadence and weight. Imagine for a second a world where there's a bunch of story implications going forward in the Fate saga. And let's say that, following Final Shape and Edge of Fate, that Renegades is something which is received really well, narratively speaking, and then they do the same with Shattered Cycle. Suddenly that's a really hard set pattern that's been created, and it's something that's really observable. And obviously the rest of the game also needs to do really well, otherwise the general attitude around the game is going to be kind of fruitless. But I do think that also that changes things, potentially. There is a world where that makes a difference and where there's a solid chunk of people who come back to experience Destiny's story again. Has that really materialized immediately? No. Is it something that will change overnight? Definitely not. But I do think it's possible. As far as the general narrative health of the game is concerned, then I think that in the long term, I have some hope. We certainly saw a big slashing of the team when it came to, well, the layoffs at the very end of Final Shape, and yeah, going into July 31st and August 1st of last year. That sucked. It's been a year since then, and it's clear that the content that the narrative team was working on has kind of elapsed now. Heresy was the last time when we saw the work of anyone like Rob or Hazel or Kaylani who was working on stuff like that. So that's now sort of exhausted. We're now working with a team that's at half capacity, or maybe not half capacity, but a smaller team than they were before. And they've still been able to do some phenomenal stuff. Like, yeah, that gives me some hope. Like, I certainly will always talk about how I'm glad that there's people like Nico Stevens and Hannah Filipski, and of course Alison Lurs, who are helping man the ship over there at the narrative team. If nothing else, I feel more confident with them at the helm than I have in a very long time, because yeah, there's much more contact between them and the community. And this is not to say that anyone who's worked on narrative in the past has been bad, certainly not. It's just, it's nice because I feel as though there's more of a connection than there used to be. I feel as though there is also been a delivery on what they promised, at very least on the narrative front of things, right? So go ahead and take a look at the idea of injecting that kind of speculation fuel back into the universe of Destiny. I really do feel as though they've delivered on that. There are so many more questions that we have, and they've brought a mysterious part of Destiny's world forward and made a really cool expansion out of it, made a really cool series of questions out of it. They've expanded on the ideas of what Destiny is, and they made the universe feel bigger again. Like, I don't know what's going on with everything in the game anymore. And that might sound bad, but no, it's actually good. The presence of questions was something that was important to outline. And yeah, that's exciting. There's also dynamic changes actually happening in the universe. It doesn't feel as though everything is standing still in quite the same way, at least from my perspective. You want one big example of that? I mean, take a look at the Vex. The Vex are finally doing something. They're becoming individuals. They're being led by Maya Sundaresh in some cases. And then you have that contrasting the main Vex consensus and collective, and suddenly it's a very different story. They are no longer this massive obelisk of a faction where they are singular in their focus, and they have a few sides to how they enact that focus, but they're still pushing towards that one goal, ruling the end of the universe. Now you have bits and pieces which are starting to show that the Vex aren't as simple as that there is some complication to them, and that given the right circumstances, they can actually do some really interesting narrative stuff when they're given independence. Sharp Cheddar, Tharsis Junction, the Choral Vex, these are all great examples of that. Then I think it's also important to acknowledge that whilst I've been saying a lot of good stuff about what the narrative team has been doing lately, clearly there are some misses, and I think it's also important to discuss them in the context of what's going on. Because ultimately, I think this does lead us to an important point of critique. I think I need to talk about Ashen Iron. So, yeah, might as well do this. The Siva stuff. Let's start there. Siva has been one of the more commonly requested themes, items, ideas to revisit in the narrative for a long time. I was part of a project back in something like 2020 called Season of the Plague, and it basically suggested an entire season based around the narrative of Siva returning. And you know, this was a fan-made concept. It ended up manifesting as a trailer, as well as a bunch of people doing bits and pieces around it, advertising it, talking a bit more about Siva, just pushing the idea. Bungie took note of it, clearly. However, I think that the narrative implementation of things here has left them in a bit of a bind. Because, as much as I hate to say it, it is accurate to say that, yeah, Siva is dead. It's been dormant in the Plaguelands for quite some time now. Rasputin is very much dead, so they have no controlling mind that is able to command it overall. Bellwinter and the memories that resided within his ghost have been put into Rasputin and also died in Season of the Seraph, so there's no Siddhartha Golem backdoor. And yeah, that also means that we're now in that strange position of, well, Siva is just background noise. So yeah, it is canonically accurate to go ahead and sit there and have this plot point of Siva is dead. But I don't think it's the right play. Just because something is canonically accurate in the moment doesn't mean it needs to stay that way. And it does make me feel a little bit of pain whenever I saw someone like DMG. God bless you, Dylan, by the way. I'm so sorry that I'm bringing you up here, but, you know, when I see him mentioning on Twitter that, yeah, Siva is dead. Because ultimately, it makes it seem as though there is an obvious answer to that question, which is, but why did it have to be dead? Now again, DMG is the community team. He is not responsible for that decision. And for what it's worth, I feel like the exotic mission might actually see us jumping into a situation where Maya is trying to take control of Siva. The long-term repercussions of that are also unknown at this point, so maybe it returns, but if it does, the messaging on this has been kind of awful so far. Siva and the themes of Rise of Iron and the stuff that it invoked were one of the most beloved parts of Destiny 1 by the end. Rise of Iron was not some major hit expansion in the same way that Taken King was. It did not have a villain that defined eras like Oryx, but it had character, flavor, personality. And so much of that was bound up with Siva, the Siva Splicers, and the Iron Lords. And I don't know, just sitting here and returning to the Plaguelands, unsurprising that people are now jumping in and, well, saying, hey, it's just the lands this time. Because yeah, Siva is dead. It seems as though it's a squandered opportunity. It almost makes me feel as though the replication, or reclamation rather, would have been a much better idea if it hadn't invoked the Plaguelands at all. There are so many other places we could have found Golden Age technology. It just makes me really irritated that we went here instead. And again, I imagine that if the Plaguelands are being involved and invoked, Siva will come up at some point. I really hope it does for the sake of everything, because invoking the Plaguelands in memory like this and then not expanding on Siva as a theme, it's tragic as far as the messaging is concerned. And again, narratively speaking, I wish there was more of a hint to it. Like there's some hints from the Scion Optus that you get to talk to whenever you're jumping into the Reclaim activities. If you go through enough of their dialogue conversations, there's ideas planted about Maya potentially chasing Siva, and that's cool, but I think this is kind of the thing where we should be telegraphing that a lot more, and maybe leading up to it with more plot points. I think Ashen Iron also tells us a little bit more about how Bungie wants to kind of craft these seasonal narratives going forward in these big updates. Let's take a look for a second and contrast this to probably one of the only examples that's even close. And that's, yeah, it's got to be Pantheon, it's got to be Into the Light, it's got to be Onslaught. Note how I mentioned the individual activities there, and not just like the name Into the Light on its own. And I think the reason I say that is because the storytelling in there was minimal, and yet you kind of still understood what was going on with all of that. Into the Light sold us the kind of gameplay fantasy of us preparing to defend the Lost City, to go into the Traveler, and to take on the ultimate enemy of the Witness. Pantheon may never be able to be replicated, but I think there were really subtle details that allowed us to really buy into the fantasy that was sold by things like Onslaught. I mean, you know, Shaxx unlocking 10 different weapons that were fantastically overpowered in their times, you know, that's great to think about. Really cool idea. But I think it's things like the pyramids and the skyboxes that sold us things with such a minimal narrative. There was a lot of show don't tell in that expansion, and that certainly is not always the right call. In fact, I'd say definitely it is not always the right call when it comes to updates like this. But sometimes you don't need too much to sell the idea of what's going on. You just need to execute on the idea well. Ashen Iron brings back the Plaguelands, and I'm glad to be back. When I was watching it on stream for the first time and playing through things, yeah, I was actually pretty excited about it. I'm also really glad about things like the Iron Lord's Axe. That's cool. It's going to be great, I'm sure. I very much look forward to the exotic mission. But I don't think the execution sells anything that is of interest. In the background of Onslaught, we had pyramid ships and tormentors, you know, jumping down to meet us as we were defending the ADU. When it comes to Reclaim, we see dead splicers on the ground and the dormant remains of Siva, and it basically just acts as a reminder of what could be. You see that contrast? The pyramid ships are, this is what's going to happen, this is what is happening now, this is what will be. And the dead splicers and the dead Siva? It's more of a reminder of, this is what could have been, not this is what will be. I hope that I'm proven wrong there, because again, the exotic mission could bring some of that back. But it feels weird to invoke all of that without jumping in and then actually executing on those themes and doing something with all of that. And I grant you, you know, it's tough to come up with some of the narrative combinations here, but man, I really do wish we could have seen more from things. There are so many interesting directions and possibilities they could have pulled from. And as far as Siva and Ashen Iron is concerned, thus far it's been a whiff, but who knows? Maybe in a couple of weeks' time the exotic mission releases and everything is actually hunky-dory, and it turns out that, hey, Siva has indeed been here, Maya Sundaresh has been trying to revive it, maybe she succeeds. If there is some interesting stuff going on there, I'd love to see the direction in which it develops, because Siva is now very much outpowered by the nanites of Neomuna, so maybe there's an arms race that goes on there. It'll be really interesting to see, honestly, but that's an if. If that all happens. I'd also say that there is an important thing to be noted as well, which is just the opening mission. I was quite bright-eyed and bushy-tailed whenever I jumped in on any kind of like first day stream kind of situation. This was also the case for Ashen Iron. At the time being, I didn't really think too much more about it other than the fact that I was excited to play new content. I've sat with it, and I've read a lot of the community's comments and thoughts about things, and yeah, I can't disagree. The first mission is conceptually a really cool idea, but it is executed wrong, in my opinion. I think that there is a very valid point brought up by many other than just myself, which is, even with the justification given by Anna in the middle of the introduction, saying that only the Night Watch are on guard, which, sorry, I also need to point out, I've never heard of Night Watch. I've never heard of them. Completely new terminology and lexicon for me in Destiny. So, yeah, apparently only Night Watch was there to defend the tower. But, you know, whatever. The point is, this is the tower, this is our home, and at the regular basis there are dozens of Guardians in this place at midnight, so it feels weird not seeing this be a bigger event. And then also, those Guardians aren't just players, it's also the Guardians that we know as NPCs. I mean, heck, even people who aren't necessarily Guardians. Soraya Hawthorne exists in the tower, much as she hasn't said things for years, But I feel as though there's also this point at which she is certainly not opposed to the idea of picking up a long rifle again and taking a few pot shots, especially if people are invading the place that has become her home of the last decade or so. Yeah, I don't know. Execution on this one did not feel great, and I think it's important to point that out, because ultimately it's important to inform the narrative team of that. That going forward has to be something that is focused on, because it's a really cool concept. An enemy is invading the tower. You have a mission in the place which is normally your social space. However, the execution of it, I think, was really not done well. I think there is absolutely a solution to all of this, though, which is also something that weaves into the story. And I'm so sorry I'm going to talk as though I'm a game dev, and I'm not. But I want to contemplate this for a second. We're sitting here wondering why Shaxx, Zavala, Saint 14, Ikora, all of these Guardians didn't jump in and try and stop the Vex of Maya's forces. And maybe why they weren't there. I wonder if it could have been done, and I wonder if it wasn't too simple to just basically have the mission be this situation where you were freeing everyone from the collars, aka the conductor's yoke, the big holographic collar that goes around everyone's neck when they end up being a part of the Choral Vex and the Nessian Schism. I wonder if it couldn't have been the case that Maya overextends her power and briefly overpowers some of those figures that we would have expected to defend the tower, and then as she has to retreat we see her powers waning, and that connection fails. I feel like that would have been a much better justification for things, because at current, it just feels very empty. You know, we sit there and we're told, hey, defend the tower, no one's home. But that's not how it ever is. Banshee is always sitting behind his kiosk with about 10,000 armaments ready to chuck to the closest civilian Guardian or FOTC patrol bot, and yeah, every single one of them can come to the defense of the tower because it's their home. And yeah, it's just very weird. It felt like Destiny was much emptier in that moment. So yeah, I think that's the other bit that I really dislike currently about Ashen Iron. I think that there is an important point to be made across all of this, right? The narrative health of the game is something that I think in the long run is going to be okay, but I don't know how much that matters unless the rest of the game gets fixed. You'll have inevitably heard so many people talk about this in much greater depth than I have today, or I will today. But yeah, I have not played Destiny in a hot minute. At least not in the same manner that I have before. I've not been doing things in order to get super ready for the epic raid, even though I am going to be doing the epic raid. Yeah, it's been very much one of those moments of I don't feel the same motivation to play. And I'll be honest, there's some cool story going on right now, but I don't want to play the game when it's in this kind of a buggy state and when the hubbub around it is so negative all the time. You know? Vibe is very much off, and that's kind of what's killing it for me. You know, like, tuning into the story is great still, but I don't know how much it matters when the rest of the game is suffering, because a game kind of has to succeed on many different fronts in order to actually hit properly. Destiny has not always had brilliant narrative, but in the moments where it's had brilliant narrative, I think it's also succeeded in a lot of other places. You know? People loved the final shape, Taken King, Witch Queen, because they did a lot of things right all at once. So, whilst I'm confident in the narrative team and what they can do going forward, even with the blunders of Ashen Iron kind of clear to see, and maybe they'll be rectified by the exotic mission, but who knows? I still don't necessarily have immediate confidence in the rest of the studio, and I hate to say that because, well, I have friends who work at the studio. I talk to people on a semi-regular basis who are just there shooting the shit with me on their days out of work. It's not as though there's some kind of thing where I've lost faith in those individuals. I think it's just got to that point where there isn't enough backing for them. There isn't enough investment in those people. It makes me really wonder how much the layoffs hurt. Like, I've talked about this before in other videos, but I've heard horror stories about team leads holding teams together in their hands and having to take on the work that they should not be doing. You know, like I've heard horror stories about team leads who should be there just being producers, effectively leading their teams, having to take on the work that their teams are also meant to be doing. That's not because the teams are incapable, by the way. It's because they got downsized in the layoffs, and now everyone has to grab an oar and start rowing. So, yeah, I hear horror stories about that across the studio, and I don't know whether all of it's correct or not, but I have to presume that's the case for some of it. You know, even anecdotal as it may be. I'm worried. I'm also worried about the way that things are for just things going forward on the channel. I should have stuck with my guns a little bit more and diversified more, that's obvious. But yeah, it's just a bit concerning right now. I don't mean to be glum about this, I really don't. Overall, I do think that there is a positive outlook for Destiny, at least in the narrative context. I just really hope that Bungie can right the ship. I don't need to explain what everyone is feeling to them, we all know what we're feeling. Things are bad right now, and I just hope that they can get better. What I can tell you is that at very least there is some good stuff coming along in the future. Like I said, I've got those videos coming out, but I've also got some other fun things coming along. I will be streaming the Epic Raid. The day before that, Friday, aka tomorrow, I will also be jumping in once again with Fallout and Brian Villalobos, aka the voice of Lodi. And this time we're going to be streaming and going through the Witch Queen campaign. Don't know if we'll finish all of it in one session, but yeah, I'm very excited for that. Witch Queen is something that Brian has not jumped into as best I know. It's a really cool story, as I'm sure all of you know, and if you want to go ahead and see all of that, the VOD will be here on YouTube and will be available on Twitch as well. Yeah, it's a weird old time. I think the best thing we can do right now is just remember to chill. And that's not to sit there and say that everything is necessarily going to work itself out. It's not to say that we shouldn't be frustrated with the pace of change or with the failure for those changes to materialize. It's just sitting there and saying that right now we need to hang tight. I wish I had better words to say, but having been through many a lull over the 12 years of being a content creator for this game that I have under my belt, this might feel amongst the worst times that Destiny has had. But the thing that has been consistent is that Destiny in one shape or another has always bounced back. I have to believe that it'll do that again in some regard. Because you know what? There's going to be someone typing into the comments right now saying, "No, Bife, it's over. It's done. This time truly they have screwed the pooch. It is completely finished. Finito. Dunzo. Jump ship. Save yourself now." And I get it, because I've been in that position where I've been thinking that exact thing. Curse of Osiris, Lightfall, Destiny 1 Vanilla, The Dark Below. God, The Dark Below. Destiny 2 Vanilla, Shadowkeep, Beyond Light. We go through this on a semi-regular basis, and yeah, it's never really been quite as bad as this, but I'll let you know, Destiny does have a way of bouncing back. Don't bet against the parts of Destiny that we all know are good because of the things that are currently bad. I think the reason that we all forget about it is because we have so much time, right? Like, I don't need to explain it to people who've been veterans of the game for thousands and thousands of hours like I have. There are bits of Destiny that we genuinely do enjoy. It's one of the games of, thanks, I hate it. I have 10,000 hours playing it. You know? It's phenomenal gunplay. It's the way that everything in the universe looks and feels, with phenomenal skyboxes and music that emotes something within you every time you hear it. There are good parts to this game that we all love, but I think it's very easy for us to focus on what isn't going right, especially when, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's going wrong right now. All I'd say is, don't believe that it's completely screwed. Don't completely believe that it's over. Because at the end of the day, there is a company behind this that is capable of doing great things, even as much as they sometimes go completely belly up and, well, make some rather foolish decisions that seem as though they're touching the hot stove. I am tired. I'm very tired of it. But I've been tired before, and they bounce back. I don't know. Sorry for not being as neutral energy or even high energy as I might usually be. It's been a very long few days. I will go ahead and make sure that I get other content out for you. Make sure you go ahead and catch the streams. I'm looking forward to doing them, I really am. And thank you for being patient with me over the last week. I needed time, I was gonna burn out otherwise properly. Anyway, you know the drill. If you want more content, hit subscribe, bell next to subscribe, all that good jazz. If you found this video useful, if you thought it was good, if you are welcoming my thoughts on this topic, then yeah, go ahead and hit a like as well. And then, of course, leave your own thoughts down below in the comments. And yeah, one last thing is on the Destiny Rising video, I'm going to try a different format. Go ahead and let me know what you think of it. I talked about becoming a storyteller, generally, in more broad terms. I don't know, this might be sort of what I want to go ahead and try and focus on as I go through and talk about my experience playing Destiny Rising. Anyway, thanks again. Thank you for watching. Puro Dacia ad Astra. I'll see you Starside.